recapping the final day of the winter meetings, including a potential Juan Soto trade. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby, award-winning baseball writer and podcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen every single day. We're proudly part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And I want this to be your show. If you have questions for Monday's mailbag, show ideas, segment ideas, tons of ways to get them to us. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Show's on Twitter at Locked On Farm. We've got email, subtext, Discord. It's all in the episode description. It's all in the show notes. We have a link tree down there with links to everything that we do. So recapping the final day of the winter meetings. Those of you on YouTube can see that I have made it back home. It was a long drive, but it was a good drive. Let's talk about the Rule 5 draft. That's the end point of the winter meetings. Some of the guys that were taken both in the major league portion and in the minor league portion, and why this year was different from previous years, as well as we have reports as to the package that the Chicago White Sox asked from the Cincinnati Reds for pitcher Dylan Cease. We'll get to that in the third segment, whether it's realistic and what that means for some other teams. But we got to open this with the biggest news that we thought was going to break on Wednesday, and then we just got left hanging. The Juan Soto going to the New York Yankees. So reports were coming out. This is obviously something we've talked about at length in the baseball world. It's been all over the winter meetings. I did a show a couple weeks ago where we talked about potential packages for Juan Soto and trying to get Juan Soto to the Yankees. And so we were hearing throughout the day that this was probably going to happen. There was an alert that YES Network was told to be ready at 2 p.m. for a special hot stove edition, like an emergency show. And then it didn't happen. Some of the reports were that the Padres wanted to look at some of the medicals before the deal went through, and ultimately both GMs left Nashville to go to the airport without the deal being finalized. That does not mean it is dead. These things can typically take a couple days to go through. There is 7 players involved in this deal. The actual package is coming from the Padres, is both outfielder Juan Soto and center fielder Trent Grisham. So it is Soto's owed around $33 million in arbitration. That's obviously a projection. And Grisham is projected to be about, I think, $5 million in arbitration. Struggled last year, hit 198, 13 home runs, 50 RBIs in just about a full season. But he's a center fielder. And with New York missing Jason Dominguez for a little while at least after having an elbow procedure, this would give them a center fielder. You have Juan Soto, who you can put in left, Aaron Judge in right. You also have Verdugo as well. And then somewhere, theoretically, is a slimmed down Giancarlo Stanton. Caught that note while we were at the winter meetings. And plenty of outfield options. It goes from a weakness and a position of scarcity to, I'm not going to say depth because some of the options aren't that great, but you have multiple options. Going back to the Padres, 5 players. The headliners: starting pitcher Michael King, MLBer, prospect Drew Thorpe, right-handed pitcher, and then catcher Kyle Higashioka, who apparently is somebody that they really wanted. I guarantee you when I said that last name wrong, I've always called him Higgy. 2, if it wasn't going to be a major league catcher, I could have seen something like a Ben Rice, potentially, a guy who obviously had great offense across single A, high A, and double A last year. Starting pitcher Johnny Brito, and right-hand pitcher Randy Vasquez, all going back to the Padres. So a package of 4 pitchers and a catcher. And combine this with New York losing 3 more pitchers in the Rule 5 draft and trading, I think it was 2 or 3 pitchers, to the Red Sox in the Verdugo trade. And you've seen a lot of arms come out of this Yankees system this week. And we'll get to those guys in just a second. So the big thing here, one, if I had to guess, and this is speculation, since I've gone to the winter meetings, people tell me I have to be careful the way I word things now. It's a speculation. I would assume that Michael King and his elbow is what, as of right now, is holding up the deal. And that's something, he broke his elbow like fractured his throwing elbow in 2022 and had major surgery. So I could understand if you wanted to check that. I'd also understand if you wanted to check Drew Thorpe's shoulder. But quick reminder on who Michael King was. Last year, 4-8 with a 2.75 ERA, threw 104 2/3 innings, did both some starts and worked in relief. So it's not an exact comparison to a typical starter or to a typical reliever, but 127 strikeouts, so 10.9 per nine, 32 walks, 2.8 per nine, and 10 home runs allowed, so like 0.9 per 9 innings. He is one of the headliners. The other headliner ended up being Drew Thorpe, and I wondered if it was going to be a Will Warren or a Clark Schmidt, but it ended up being Drew Thorpe. And last year, Drew Thorpe led minor league baseball in strikeouts, had 182, so 23 games between high A and double A for Drew Thorpe. Went 14-2, which I know wins and losses don't count. They don't matter in the minor leagues, but hearing numbers like that do stand out. 14-2 for a record for Drew Thorpe in the minors last year. A 2.52 ERA in 139 1/3 innings. 182 strikeouts, like I said, 11.8 per nine, to 38 walks, 2.5 per nine, and 13 home runs allowed. So it's about 0.8 home runs per 9 innings. The thing for Drew Thorpe, and what you need to know as a Padres fan, is none of the stuff is incredibly impressive, right? Like, nothing that Drew Thorpe throws absolutely blows you away. He was drafted out of Cal Poly in, I think it was the second round in 2022, like a round after Brooks Lee, who went to the Twins. And he didn't pitch after the draft because they were working on fixing his mechanics and building some more velo into there. His fastball was like 90, 91 in college. It's sitting now about 92, 93, can touch 94. But Drew Thorpe doesn't make it happen with just the fastball or even just any one pitch. It's a very good fastball. He has very good command and control of everything. You can tell by the walk numbers, 2.5 walks per 9 innings. And the fastball has a lot of characteristics that you like. More, I want to say it's just under 1.5 feet of induced vertical break up in the zone. Really good carry up in the zone. But he throws a lot of different pitches. And for the most part, a lot of them come in at average or better. So the changeup is probably the best secondary pitch. It sits 82-ish. It's about 10 mile an hour separate from the fastball, which is ideally what you're looking for as far as velocity separation. But again, it comes out of the exact same arm slot, the exact same arm speed. So the deception is absolutely there. Really good. Over 60% swing and miss on the changeup last year. He has a slider, and he's not a fastball heavy pitcher. He throws a lot of sliders as well. It's a gyro slider called a bullet slider a lot of places. We've talked about this on the show before, but rather than the spin of the ball moving across the face of the ball and pulling the ball to the side, it spins like you would throw a spiral for a football, or it spins like a bullet does, stabilizes the flight, and gravity is what pulls the ball down. It sits mid-80s, 83, 84. Again, another pitch, really good swing and miss. And then he has a cutter, and he has what I've seen called a sweeping curveball, but I think it's more of just a traditional sweeper, right? Some of my observations on watching him, because I was like, how is he striking out this many guys? He uses those kind of early in the count, right? Because everybody's looking, the things you're looking for, you're trying to watch for the slider and you're trying to watch for the changeup. Because he throws the slider as much as he throws the fastball, right? The fastball feels like it's hittable, but it fools you up in the zone. And so early in the count, he'll throw a cutter or he'll throw up the sweeper. I'm going to call it a sweeper. I've seen sweeping curveball. I've seen it called a slider. I'm going to call it a sweeper because that's what it looked like on the screen. And honestly, I love a guy who throws both a sweeper and a gyro slider. I just think it's a great combination. And then so you have all of that stuff. You have 5 pitches. He can throw them all for strikes whenever he wants to. It's very good command and control both. And so you combine all of these things, and you have a guy where if nothing else changes, if these are his velocities, this is what he can do, you have an absolute pretty easy to understand number 4, number 5 guy. He can post every 5 days. He can give you the assumption would be he could give you a standard 150, 170, 180 innings in a season. He can post. He can do all of that stuff. If the Padres can get a little more velocity out of the package, which I don't know if they can because the Yankees have already done some of that work. And honestly, I trust the Yankees to do that more than I do the Padres, and that's nothing against the Padres. That's a kudos to the Yankees. But if you can add a little bit more velocity or significantly improve one of those tertiary pitches, the sweeper, the cutter, if you could make those a little bit better to give him another legit weapon he can throw at any time in the count, maybe you can see a guy who could be a number 3 versus a 4 or 5. But either way, very reliable pitcher. It's just the package ends up being, you have to laugh about what they gave up to get Juan Soto versus what they're getting after a season when they trade him away. In just a minute, let's talk about the other pitchers the Yankees lost, in this case in the Rule 5 draft, the 10 guys taken in the first round, as well as some of the prominent minor leaguers taken. We'll do that next right here on Locked on MLB Prospects. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, no better time to get in on the action. The app is incredibly easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options. Spreads, player props, over-unders, all kind of stuff like that. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get going this NFL season as we're getting towards the holidays, watching football games with family. We're getting towards bowl games for college football. Plenty of opportunities to go out there and get involved with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Okay, so talking final day of the winter meetings, and again, the Rule 5 draft is the unofficial end of the winter meetings. There's a little bit of additional stuff that happens after this. There's a scouting dinner and things like that, but for the most part, this is it. And when you look at this year's Rule 5 draft, this one was a little bit, I'm not going to say disappointing, but this one was a little bit smaller because this is more side effects of that 2020 draft, right? If you look out, smaller draft class, and so there's less players that became Rule 5 eligible this year. You're going to have this same problem next year as well, because if you remember, the rules on Rule 5 eligibility is guys that signed at 18 or younger and have played 5 seasons, or 19 or older and played 4 seasons. And so, and these decisions had to be made in November. You had to add eligible prospects to your 40-man roster, or they would be available here. And then if you take any of these guys in the major league portion, and again, 10 guys were taken, it is a cost of $100,000. And that player has to be on your active 26-man roster for the entirety of the 2024 season. You do have a bit of an allowance for injury, but for the most part, they have to be on your 26-man roster. If you choose to take them off the 26-man roster, you option them down, you waive them, whatever it might be, you have to offer them back to the original team that you got them from. And if that team wants them back, they pay you $50,000 and they get them back. Now, after the major league phase of the Rule 5 draft, you have the minor league phase. Those players do not have any sort of roster restrictions. It is a very small amount. I want to say it's like $24,000. It's not much at all. And they are yours. There is no requirement they go on the big league roster. It's just your player. 10 total players were taken this year. And a lot of times in the Rule 5 draft, you'll see some very, I'm not going to call them stereotypes. Archetypes is maybe a better word to put it. You're going to see relievers. You're going to see like a lot of relievers. And if you think about it, it's easier to hide a reliever that you have to use twice a week in a blowout versus a guy that's legitimately like a position player who has to play every day, right? But if you do see a position player, it's going to be a guy that has one standout tool and is lagging in everything else. Your 10 picks this year, and briefly going to mention them all, but we're going to dive into one or two of them that I thought were really interesting. The number one, the Oakland A's took Mitch Spence from the New York Yankees. Made a 29 starts in AAA last year. The ERA wasn't great. Strikeouts were just below 9 per 9 innings. It's one of those guys, fastball slider combo. Both those pitches are good. The velocity's not great on the fastball. Why he hadn't made it up yet, but a guy that should get a major league shot and just hadn't done it with the Yankees yet. So that's one. The Kansas City Royals took Matt Sauer, a right-hand pitcher from the Yankees. Another fastball slider guy. He started in AA, but he feels like he's probably bound for the bullpen. But because he was a starter, you can probably use him as a swing man, a long man, maybe a spot start here and there. Some potential, but again, it's mostly like a 1-2 combo fastball slider. Third pitch isn't that great. Colorado Rockies took right-hand pitcher Anthony Molina from the Rays. He was mostly a reliever, got a little bit of time in AAA, and got a little bit of starts, and didn't look that great, honestly, in AAA. And so I worry about you take that and then you send him to Colorado, what's going to happen in that altitude. So don't feel great about that one, but it's fine. Shane Drohan, lefty from the Red Sox, went to the White Sox. And this was one of the ones, a lot of people were watching this, had a very good opening to the season. He was in AA. He was throwing a fastball. It was a four-seam fastball and a cutter. Looked really good. It was like 34 innings, 36 strikeouts, 9 walks. ERA's pretty low. And then he went to AAA Worcester and just absolutely bombed. ERA of 6.5 in Worcester, and it was not great. Now, he has legitimately good stuff. The changeup's a good pitch. Again, the cutter looked better this year. The four-seam fastball. The pieces are there. And again, a lefty. And so the White Sox grabbed him. Very little risk here for them. Love that. The Nationals at 5 took a position player, shortstop Nasim Nunez. If you'll remember, I said if it's a position player, they have one standout tool. He is a very good defender and also very good speed, which means he can run well. Now, the issue is I don't think he can hit in the major league level worth a lick. It's in AA this year. It was something like he made decent contact, right? Like his end zone contact rate was like in the mid 80s. His chase rate was barely above 20%. And you're like, Lindsay, what's the issue with that? Nothing's the issue with that. In AA Pensacola and Southern League, yes, but still batted .225 with a .341 on base and a .286 slugging. Had 5 home runs and 18 extra base hits in 125 games. Got 20 games in the Arizona Fall League. Batted .253 with a .291 slugging. So again, power is just not there, but he plays good defense. He's a good runner as well. And so if they're looking for a guy to be a defensive replacement, to be a pinch runner, things like that, not a bad pick. Cardinals took Ryan Fernandez, a righty from the Red Sox. Fantastic stuff. And has some issues with his medical history. He's been hurt a lot in the past, but the actual stuff is really good. Fastball, he can run it up to 97. He has a gyro slider, sits in the upper 80s. Got a curveball, a cutter that's in the upper 80s. And so, looked really good. ERA wasn't great in AAA, but he still struck out 1 out of every 4 batters he faced. 25% strikeout percentage. And so it's one of those, okay, the velocity's good. He's got good breaking pitches. He threw a lot of the cutter more and more last year. That became his primary pitch. Could be a guy that could stick in a bullpen, can bring some gas, throwing 97 out of the bullpen. Justin Slayton from the Rangers, right-handed pitcher, taken by the Mets, traded to the Red Sox. Now, when this happens, the Red Sox, who now have Justin Slayton, they are still required to stick with the rules on a player as far as keeping them on the roster all year. The Mets have to keep Justin Slayton on the roster all year, or they have to offer him back to the Rangers. The compensation the Red Sox got back, left-hand pitcher Ryan Ammons, and some cash considerations, they keep that no matter what. The Mets had a chance to pick. A couple folks wanted Slayton. That was J.J. Cooper of Baseball America said that was the number one name coming up. The Mets got him, traded him to the Red Sox. Reliever, but fastball 97 or so. He's got a sweeper that goes along with it. He throws a cutter. I've heard he has a curveball. I've never seen the curveball, but I've heard it. He was in mostly AA last year, got a little bit of time in AAA. I think the Rangers could have probably used him in the bullpen, but for some reason they didn't protect him. Was taken. The biggest one to me, the most interesting one I was excited for here, Devison De Los Santos of the Diamondbacks. I mentioned position players would have a standout tool. Dude's got power. His 90th percentile exit velocity in the minors last year, 106.5. If you look at players under the age of 21, and he played last year at the age of 20, it was his age 20 season, it's a top 10 figure. 113 games in AA Amarillo, 254, 297, 431 in 113 games, 20 home runs, 38 extra base hits. He also struck out 125 times. So this is a situation now where the Guardians have to figure out, where do we play him? He's listed as a third baseman. He's not going to be great at third base. They're probably going to have to move him to first base. They've got a thing over there because they already have Kyle Manzardo. And this is something where the contact ability isn't great. He chases a lot. And so we know they have a lot of contact hitters. How much of that is the draft decisions and how much of that is their coaching and development? I think we're going to find out with Devison De Los Santos. I don't think he's going to make it the full season. It's hard to be a contender with a guy like this. But if it works out, if they're able to get his contact ability to be better, he could have the best outcome of any guy taken this year. Last couple guys, Carson Coleman of the Yankees was taken by the Rangers. Didn't pitch because he had elbow surgery, so don't know a ton about him. I remember his stuff looking pretty good in 22, but I have not seen anything recently. And then the Padres took Steven Kolick from the Mariners. Sinker slider guy. The slider is a sweeper. You love to see that. They love those. He's got a four-seamer as well, can run it up mid-90s. Looks good. Got to AAA, was pitching for Tacoma, did pretty well. We're going to see what happens to him. In just a minute, Dylan Cease was... In just a minute, the Chicago White Sox made an ask of the Cincinnati Reds in exchange for Dylan Cease, and it was wild. We'll talk about that next right here on Locked on MLB Prospects. Welcome back to Locked on MLB Prospects. Final segment here, recapping the final day of the winter meetings. Tons of fun. Again, thank you to everybody who has watched the show, who has shared the show, who has listened to the show, sent comments, anything like that. Because of you guys is why we were able to go to the winter meetings, had a great time. Okay, so the Dylan Cease of the Chicago White Sox is one of the more desired potential playoff starters that's available on the trade market because he has 2 years of control and he's just 1 year removed from a very, very good season when the White Sox weren't as bad as they were last year. And the Reds are reportedly a team that has been interested. And Bruce 11 of 670 The Score has confirmed a report about the discussions between the White Sox and the Reds for the deal. And supposedly, the White Sox asked for 4 players from the Reds. And all of them were in the top 15. So this package was right-hand pitcher Rhett Lauder, taken in this most recent draft in the top 10, number 7 overall this summer out of Wake Forest. Chase Petty, the right-handed pitcher, he's only 20 years old. He was acquired in the deal that sent Sonny Gray to Minnesota, which the deal that kind of ended up being a disaster. Oh, no, it was a Tyler Mulley deal that was a disaster for the Twins. That's right. I can't remember which Twins deal was the bad one, but Chase Petty in the Sonny Gray deal. I watched him pitch last year. We'll talk about that in a second. And then catcher Alfredo Duno, who just came off a DSL season, and outfielder Jay Allen, who was a high pick that has barely played in the first couple of years he's been in the system. So break this down real quick. Rhett Lauder, top 10 pitcher, top 10 draft pick this most recent summer, a guy that is seen as potentially being a fast mover to the majors because of the skill of the changeup. Those Wake Forest guys come out pretty well developed already, so that's where that came from. We have not seen him pitch yet. One of the guys that just did not get any MLB time was doing all stuff in instructs and with in developmental settings that we don't have access to, so we don't know what he looked like after the draft. But should be a guy, could probably start off at high A next year and could hopefully move relatively quickly because the changeup's so good. Chase Petty, again, first rounder by the Twins, moved over, spent most of the year and high A Dayton. Again, age 20. He would have been a sophomore in college, I think. High A Dayton got 2 starts in Double A Chattanooga. I was there for one of those 2 starts in Double A Chattanooga versus the Montgomery Biscuits, the week I called the week of Biscuits games. Combined between the two, 18 starts, 0-2, record doesn't matter, 1.72 ERA for Chase Petty. 68 innings, 66 strikeouts, so 8.7 per 9, to 15 walks, 2 walks per 9, did not allow a home run in 2023. So the thing with Chase Petty is he is a very good pitcher. There is a reason that he is a top 5 prospect for the Reds. He is not ready yet. So he had to work on some things coming out of high school. He was a dude that he had a ton of velocity. He was hitting 100 miles an hour in high school, but his mechanics were not good. And it looked like he was just absolutely going to destroy his body. So they really cleaned up his mechanics, calmed everything down. He doesn't throw as hard now. And some of that feels like it's a deliberate decision. And some of that is the adjustment to, I have to pitch every 5 days. I told you, we don't have a ton of empirical data on the transition from throwing once a week or whatever to throwing every 5 days. So some of it may be that. But he was, in high school, it was really a slider and then a fastball that felt like more of a 2-seam than a 4-seam. And now he is throwing a 4-seam fastball. He has a changeup that he feels good with. And so you have 2-seam fastball, 4-seam fastball, sliders like a cutter. He's got a changeup. He doesn't go super deep into games. And I don't know how much of that was he missed like a month of the season early because of an elbow injury, and how much of that is just them being cautious with him. I don't know if one's because of the other or not. The control was pretty good, right? So he can hit his spots. He can get the stuff on this. One of the issues that Chase Petty had, and I don't see it a lot in some of the write-ups, it may have just been an isolated thing late in the season as fatigue set in, but he still has a little bit of that he's just on the wrong side of being an emotional pitcher, right? Being frustrated when calls don't go your way, being frustrated when you make a good pitch and it gets fouled off, getting a little bit too emotional on the mound. There's some guys who can harness that emotion into focus and into kind of resolve. And there's some guys where it's still easy for them to get a little bit too in their head and let the emotion overcome their skills and the control. And it felt like Petty was still on the line of the emotion was doing a little bit too much. Now, admittedly, that was the only game of his that I saw in person. Now, I don't necessarily know if that is something he showed all year and it just didn't show up on broadcast. If that was a bad game for him, caveat on that. But that's Chase Petty. Alfredo Duno just had a very good year not here's in a fall league, in the DSL, 6'2", 210, not a great runner, probably going to slow down a little bit if he's a full-time catcher. Didn't actually catch a bunch. He just was like a DH exclusively because he had some soreness in his arm, and it's supposed to be like a 60 or 70 grade arm, massive arm, but because he had arm soreness, they just had him DH and nothing else. The projections are that he should be at least an above average defender. Obviously, the running's not great. The power's supposed to be plus power as well. The projections are 20 plus home runs. Hit tool should be at least average. Really good catching prospect. Probably the best one they've had since Tyler Stevenson. But he's also very young. He'll come stateside for the first time this year. And then the last guy is Jay Allen. First rounder in 2021 out of high school, who has played a grand total over 3 seasons of 141 games. And a lot of those, most of those, 91, were in 2022. He only got 31 games this year because of, I believe it was a UCL injury in his thumb. Like he tore a ligament in his thumb. And a younger player, very fast, 65 or so speed, very plus center fielder, as 60 defense. Arm is good. Questions about both the power ceiling because of his swing and his inherent strength. It's more of a line drive swing than a home run swing, as well as we haven't seen enough of him consistently to know if he can hit at least an average level. So it's an interesting package. I feel it's a risky package for the Reds to send those 4 guys for 2 years of Dylan Cease, simply because at the end of those 2 years, you could see Chase Petty and Rhett Lauder in the majors. And so it's hard to make that deal. But at the same time, you'd understand why the Reds would do that, because they were so close to being in the postseason this year. And then now they're going to get the number 2 pick in the draft too. So that's pretty nice. You can always get another prospect to replace some of the top ones you move if they end up making that deal. Fantastic week this week. One more show coming up. In the meantime, if you have questions for the mailbag, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Show's on Twitter at Locked On Farm. Everything else in the episode description in the show notes. Until tomorrow's show, remember, it's always a great time to pay a minor leaguer.